My father started laughing before the judge even entered the courtroom. Not loudly, just enough for me to hear it. The kind of laugh people make when they're already convinced they've won. His attorney smiled. My brother stared at the table. Good. And I sat there wondering how everything had gone so wrong. 3 years earlier, I would have done anything for that man. That's the part people never understand. When they hear this story, they imagine I always knew who my father was. I didn't. Good. For most of my life, I thought he was my hero. The person who worked long hours to provide for our family. The person who taught me how to drive. The person who told me I could become anything if I worked hard enough. Good. I spent years chasing his approval. Years, and somehow, despite all of that, I was sitting across from him in court while he tried to convince everyone that I was the villain. The judge's chair was still empty when my father leaned toward me. Good. He didn't even bother lowering his voice. You should have stayed quiet like your grandmother did. The words hit me like a slap. Not because they hurt, because they were wrong. My grandmother never stayed quiet. Not once. Good. She was the strongest person I'd ever known, and the second he said that, I knew something. He still thought nobody knew the truth. He still believed the secret had died with her. Good. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had been planning for this day long before she passed away, and by the end of the hearing, everyone in that room was going to find out, including him. The story started 4 years earlier. Good. The day we buried my grandmother. I've heard people say funerals reveal who people really are. I never believed that until hers. She wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but she had built a successful business over 40 years. Good. A small manufacturing company that eventually became worth several $1 million. More importantly, she built it herself. She came from nothing. No inheritance, no wealthy parents, nothing. Every dollar she had came from decades of work. Good. That's why everyone assumed she had a detailed estate plan. My grandmother planned everything: birthdays, vacations, family reunions. You couldn't imagine her leaving behind confusion. But confusion is exactly what happened. Good. At the funeral reception, my father barely spoke to anyone. Instead, he spent the entire afternoon making phone calls, leaving rooms, having whispered conversations, checking emails. At first, I thought he was overwhelmed. Looking back, good. I realized he was managing something else entirely. 3 days later, he called a family meeting. My brother and I showed up expecting paperwork and legal discussions. Instead, good. My father walked into the room carrying a folder and announced that Grandma's estate had already been settled. That alone felt strange. The funeral had barely happened. How could everything already be resolved? Then came the shock. According to him, good. My grandmother had left virtually everything to him. The company, the investments, the properties, the savings. Almost all of it. I remember staring at him, waiting for someone else in the room to question it. Nobody did. Not my brother did. Not my aunt, not anyone. It felt surreal, because my grandmother had spent years talking about dividing things fairly among family members and charitable organizations she supported. Good. She wasn't the type of person who would suddenly leave everything to one child, especially not my father. Not because she disliked him, because she believed fairness mattered. I asked to see the will. The room went silent. Good. My father's expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared from his face. "That's not necessary," he said. I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The answer was no. The lawyer handled everything. Good. The estate was finalized. There was nothing to discuss. Looking back, that was the first moment I should have realized something was wrong. Instead, I ignored my instincts. I wanted to believe my father. Good. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. For months, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Then strange things started happening. Family friends stopped mentioning my grandmother's estate. Good. My father became defensive whenever questions came up. Financial records seemed impossible to access. And every time I asked for information, I got a different answer. One afternoon, I stopped by my grandmother's old house. Good. Technically, it belonged to my father now. He was cleaning it out, or at least that's what he claimed. I walked inside and immediately noticed dozens of boxes stacked near the front door. Most were labeled for donation. One box sat by itself, sealed. Good. Marked private. When my father saw me looking at it, he practically ran across the room. That caught my attention because my father wasn't a man who ran. "Ivor, what are you doing?" he snapped. I stared at him, looking at a box. Good. "It's being handled." The response made no sense. Safford by who? It was a cardboard box. For a brief second, I thought about opening it. I wish I had, because 2 days later it disappeared completely. No explanation, no discussion. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not suspicious. Wrong, like pieces of a puzzle had been forced together in ways they weren't supposed to fit. For the first time, I started wondering whether my father was hiding something. The thought made me feel guilty. This was my father, the man who raised me, the man I trusted. Accusing him in my mind felt like betrayal. So I pushed the thought away. At least I tried to. Then 6 months later, everything changed. I was cleaning my garage on a Saturday afternoon when I found a box of old family photographs. Nothing unusual, just pictures from holidays and birthdays. As I sorted through them, a folded envelope slipped from between 2 photo albums. I almost threw it away. Then I recognized the handwriting. My grandmother's. My heart immediately started racing. The envelope had my name written across the front. No stamp. No mailing address, just my name. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first few lines seemed ordinary. Then I reached a paragraph that made my stomach drop. I read it once. Then again, then a third time. Because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My grandmother wrote that if anything happened to her unexpectedly, I should contact a woman named Eleanor Grant. I had never heard that name before, not once. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I do not trust the changes being made around me. I froze. What changes? What was she talking about? And why would she leave that message specifically for me? The questions wouldn't leave my head. The next morning, I called Eleanor Grant. I expected the number to be disconnected. Instead, a woman answered immediately. The moment I mentioned my grandmother's name, she went quiet. Very quiet. Then she asked a question that sent chills down my spine. Did your father tell you everything was left to him? I nearly dropped the phone, because that wasn't information I had given her. And somehow, she already knew. I nearly dropped the phone. Because that wasn't information I had given her. And somehow, she already knew. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Then she said something I'll never forget. Your grandmother hired me 8 months before she died. I sat down immediately. Hired you for what? There was a pause. To protect her estate from your father. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My father wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was a businessman, a respected member of the community. A man people trusted. At least that's what everyone believed. Eleanor explained that she was a private fiduciary consultant. My grandmother contacted her after noticing unusual pressure from family members regarding her finances. At first, my grandmother assumed it was harmless. Then she started noticing documents appearing that she didn't remember requesting. Meetings being scheduled without her approval. Conversations ending when she entered rooms. Eventually, she became concerned enough to seek outside help. What kind of help? I asked. Eleanor's answer made my stomach turn. She believed someone was trying to manipulate her estate plan. Everything inside me went cold. Then came the first major twist. My grandmother had never intended to leave everything to my father. Not even close. Eleanor possessed copies of estate planning documents showing that nearly half the company was supposed to be transferred into a charitable foundation. The remaining assets were divided among multiple beneficiaries, including me, including my brother, including employees who had worked alongside my grandmother for decades. The version my father presented after her death looked nothing like it. Nothing. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. I hired an attorney. The reaction from my family was immediate. My father called me greedy. My aunt stopped returning my calls. Relatives began posting passive-aggressive comments online. Family friends suddenly became distant. I wasn't just challenging a document. I was challenging the story everyone had already accepted. And people hate having their stories challenged, especially when it forces them to admit they were wrong. The following year became the hardest of my life. Legal battles are nothing like television. They're slow, expensive, exhausting. Every victory comes buried beneath months of frustration. There were nights I sat alone wondering if I should walk away. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I was destroying the family. Maybe I should let it go. Then something happened that changed everything again. My brother called. Not to apologize. Not to support me, to ask me to stop. His voice sounded nervous, almost desperate. He claimed the case was hurting everyone, damaging relationships, creating stress. The conversation felt strange. Like he wasn't saying what he actually wanted to say. Then I asked a question, a simple one. Why are you really calling? Silence. Long silence, then he hung up. 3 days later, I found out why. My attorney received bank records connected to the estate. Buried within thousands of pages was a transfer. Then another, then another. Money had been moving through a series of accounts shortly before my grandmother's death. And one of those accounts belonged to my brother. I remember staring at the paperwork, unable to process it, not because of the money, because of what it meant. My brother wasn't just aware of what happened. He was involved. That realization hurt more than anything my father had done. My father disappointed me. My brother broke my heart. Weeks later, under oath, he finally admitted part of the truth. Years earlier, my father promised him leadership of the company. Ownership. Influence, security, everything my brother wanted. In return, he stayed quiet. He signed documents, attended meetings, and ignored questions he knew should have been asked. The courtroom wasn't even necessary at that point. Emotionally, that confession was worse than any verdict, but the biggest shock was still waiting, because while investigators reviewed financial records, they uncovered something nobody expected. Not my attorney, not Eleanor, not even me. A video recording. My grandmother had secretly recorded a meeting. The existence of that recording changed everything. For legal reasons, obtaining access took months of motions. Arguments, delays. During that time, my father acted increasingly confident. He mocked the lawsuit publicly, told people I was desperate, told people I was embarrassing myself. The more evidence appeared, the more arrogant he became. At first, that confused me, then I realized why. He didn't know the recording existed. When the court finally approved access, everyone gathered in a conference room. Attorneys, investigators, experts. My hands were shaking. The video started. My grandmother appeared on screen older, more tired than I remembered. But unmistakably herself. Then my father entered the room. And within minutes, every assumption people had made about this case exploded, because my grandmother wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She wasn't unaware. She knew exactly what was happening. The recording showed her confronting my father directly, asking why he kept pressuring her to alter estate documents, asking why he kept involving my brother, asking why he was treating her wishes like obstacles. The room fell silent. Then came the sentence that changed the entire case. My grandmother looked directly at him and said, "If anything happens to the foundation, I'll know exactly who caused it." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording ended. And suddenly the case transformed. This was no longer a disagreement about interpretation. This was evidence. Real evidence. Powerful evidence. The legal pressure became overwhelming. Former employees came forward. Former advisors came forward. Even distant relatives started sharing information. The story everyone believed began collapsing, brick by brick, lie by lie. Yet somehow, my father refused to back down. Which is how we eventually arrived at the courtroom where this story began. The hearing everyone expected him to win. The hearing where he laughed before the judge entered. The hearing where he whispered that I should have stayed quiet. Hoare's past arguments were presented. Documents were reviewed. Witnesses testified. The atmosphere grew heavier with every piece of evidence. Then something unexpected happened. The judge requested a sealed document. One nobody besides a few attorneys had discussed publicly. My father looked confused. So did most people in the room. The judge reviewed the document carefully, then looked toward me, and said my full name, every word, including a title my father had spent years mocking. Years earlier, when I chose my career path, my father laughed at it. He said it was unrealistic, said I'd never succeed, said nobody would take me seriously. What he never understood was that while he was busy building influence, I was building expertise. The title wasn't honorary. It wasn't ceremonial. It represented years of specialized work investigating financial misconduct, estate fraud, and fiduciary abuse. The exact type of misconduct at the center of this case. A ripple moved through the courtroom. People began connecting dots, including my father. For the first time all day, his confidence disappeared. Then the judge revealed why the title mattered. The court had appointed me years earlier as a successor trustee candidate in a sealed contingency arrangement created by my grandmother, not because I requested it, because she requested it. The document had been hidden among legal records. Nobody thought to examine until late in the case. My grandmother anticipated resistance. She anticipated manipulation. She anticipated exactly what happened. And she prepared for it. Good. The room went completely silent. My father looked stunned. My brother looked sick. Then came the final blow. The judge ruled that the contested estate modifications were invalid. Good. The foundation would be established according to my grandmother's original wishes. The company would be restructured. The diverted assets would be recovered. Additional investigations would proceed. My father didn't say anything, not immediately. Good. He just sat there staring ahead. The man who spent years controlling every conversation suddenly had nothing left to say. When the hearing ended, people slowly filed out of the courtroom. Rewarders gathered outside. Attorneys exchanged handshakes. Good. Families whispered. I stood near the exit, watching everything unfold. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My brother, for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked a question. Do you think Grandma would have forgiven me? I looked at him. Good. Really looked at him. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel angry, just sad because the answer wasn't mine to give. I don't know, I said honestly. He nodded, then walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. Good. A few months later, the foundation officially launched. Scholarships were created, programs were funded. Employees my grandmother cared about received support. The future she wanted finally existed. Not because I won, because the truth did. Good. People often assume the best part of this story was the courtroom victory. It wasn't. The best part happened much later. One evening I visited my grandmother's grave. The sun was setting. The air was quiet. And for the first time in years, good. I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace, not revenge, not triumph. Peace because I finally understood something. The inheritance was never the real battle. The money wasn't the real battle. The company wasn't the real battle. Good. The real battle was refusing to let someone else's lies become my reality. My father spent years trying to convince everyone he controlled the story. In the end, the story belonged to the truth. Good. And the truth doesn't care how powerful you think you are. It only waits for the right moment to be heard.